And so we are open from 1 to 4 daily between Tuesday and Saturday until the 1st of July. But the reality is that once the weather breaks and we open the door, people just come in whether they're open or not. So we will be open. We expect to be, because the student groups are starting to arrive, hundreds at a time, 50, 75 students coming in through there. And so the doors will be open most days, except for Monday when we are officially closed until the 1st of July, and on Sunday, of course. We have some exciting exhibits coming up that we're developing right now. Greg Feckner, who is operations director, he is working with us right now on developing an exhibit on the Loyalist settlement at down by Salamanca, the original Loyalist settlement that was there in 1783 when those first Loyalists arrived. We're also working on a very interesting project on the history of Black Loyalists in this area. And there's a young woman by the name of Jennifer Dow who's going to co-curate that. And she is a descendant of Aeneas Lupi, who was brought here by a fellow by the name of Anthony Allaire, who was a lieutenant and later captain in the King's New Brunswick Regiment. And he apparently snatched Aeneas Lupi as a child while the British were on retreat. And this young fellow was a black slave, of course. And they brought him up here and he became a drummer boy. He was the drummer boy for the regiment. And then he ended up moving here in Fredericton and, in New Brunswick. And the family now, of course, we're talking 10 generations later, going to tell that story. We're also working on a project about the Acadian settlement at Point St. Anne. And that's another project with Dr. Chantal Richard. We're applying for a SHIRT grant for that. And we're hoping that that's going to pan out because it's a very interesting and large, multifaceted project. So there's a number of things happening at the museum. It's very exciting. We can always use more volunteers, as Paul O'Connell found out this morning, as he was at my office at 10 o'clock, volunteering. And we have many volunteers, and Paul Inman over here as well. I didn't see him back there. And so many people. I mean, the whole organization is made up of volunteers, really. And it's, I'd just like to very quickly point out the people who are here from the board of directors. Gary Campbell is here. Former member of the board of directors is Bob Dallison. Where is Alex here? Alex? No? Okay, Fred White's over there, and Ian Andrews, of course. And if I miss anybody, please don't get at me, but maybe you can tell me a minute. So, without any further ado, I'll introduce Greg Feckner, who is going to introduce the speaker.
Yes, Melinda, yes. What group are you referring to? That's, what you just spoke to, what group is it? I didn't catch it at the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry, the York Sunbury Historical Society and the Fredericton Region Museum.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry. It's the York Sunbury Historical Society and Fredericton Region Museum. Always use volunteers. Okay, Greg, here you go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to briefly introduce our guest speaker tonight, and I'll say just had the opportunity here to read your bio, and boy, yeah, a series of accomplishments. You put me to shame, sir. But anyways, Gary Forward began his career 26 years ago in public safety with the Fredericton Police Force in 1990 and retired as the inspector in charge of the major crime and primary response teams in 2016. Gary has held positions with Fredericton's drug section, street crime unit, and as a sniper and later commander of the force's emergency response team. So you got a keen eye, I can see. Gary is a recipient of the Police Exemplary Service Medal, the Craig Bailey Memorial Award for Crime Prevention Initiatives, and the RCMP's Award of Distinction for Excellence in Human Resource Management. Following completion of the Advanced Certificate in Police Leadership and Management from Dalhousie University in 2007, Gary attended the University of New Brunswick to pursue his post-secondary education, and in 2010 received a Bachelor of Integrated Studies. As a result of his educational experience and as a member of the Fredericton Police Force, Gary began to consider Fredericton's early criminal justice history with particular interest into the origin and evolution of the city's police force. In 2012, Gary returned to the University of New Brunswick to research the subject, and in the spring of 2016 received his Master's of Arts in History following completion of his thesis. Gary joined the New Brunswick Contraband Enforcement Unit in February 2016 as the inspector in charge, and is happily married to his wife, Deline, and proud father of 3 children. Katie, 23, Haley, 21, and Matt, 11 years. Like I said, humble.
Okay, so first and foremost, I want to thank the Society for inviting me here today. I have to tell you, it was a few months ago that I got a call from Coral to say, would you be interested in coming and speaking about your thesis and the history of policing in Fredericton? And I remember at the time we had an operation on the go. There was a few officers in my office, and we were talking, about what we needed to do to get the job done. And I think I just said yes to Coral, so I can just move right on into the next thing, figuring that it's a few months and I won't worry too much about it. Of course, last week rolled around and I said, I think I have to do something, and that was quickly followed up by a call from Melinda saying you have to do something. The next thing you know, CBC News was calling, and I figured I better get on top of this. And I say this, with some seriousness. It was nice to be able to get back to, I guess, reacquainting myself with the information, with the research. And if not for this opportunity, I don't think I would have been back there. Why? Because we all know, daily activities, responsibilities, family, work can sometimes clog up our day. So I want to thank Coral and Melinda and all of you for the opportunity to come and speak with you here tonight. The other thing is just a caveat. I am rusty. As you can well imagine, I defended my thesis in early 2016. So if I'm not up on all the particular, the exact specifics, please forgive me. But I'll do the best I can tonight. Okay? Right? And you go right to the next one. So basically, what happened was I was in the police force, and I'll just tell you very quickly. I had done 2 years at the University of Brunswick after graduating high school, and I was not a good student. I was not interested at all in university. I was going simply to be able to perhaps attain an undergrad and get into the police force. As luck would have it, I got a phone call and I got accepted into the police academy and waved goodbye to UMD and was happy to do so. Over the years, I started to mature, and I started considering other things that I felt were important objectives that I wanted to start looking forward to. And probably around 2007, I really started asking questions about the Fredericton Police Force and thought, well, what a great opportunity to sort of do something I like, its nexus to work, and also maybe do something, my part, I guess, in documenting history. So I quickly found out that there was not a lot of information. Now, one might debate that and say, well, Garrett, you look hard enough, you'll find it. And I was speaking with Dave tonight. Dave's with the Fredericton Fire Department. I've known Dave for the better part of 3.5 decades. We used to work at Sobeys together. Bag guys. We bagged the groceries. So you really have to appreciate that from the fire department, they kept some very, very, very good archival information. Lots of photographs, lots of information. Regrettably and unfortunately, with the police department in Fredericton, in the mid to late 70s, there was a conversation that took place in the police department where an officer or clerk went into the deputy chief's office and basically said, there's too much material in our storage. We're running out of storage space, and we've got all of these log books and everything, and all these things taking up space dating back to the origin of the police force. So the deputy chief, rest his soul in his infinite wisdom, said, burn it all. Keep the last 10 years and take it to the dump and burn it all, which the officer or clerk often did. So It has been somewhat of a chore, but a chore that I've absolutely embraced to take on. And I was saying to Dave, the nice thing about not having a lot of information is that when you do find something, you get pretty excited. I'll come back to that. So as I looked into this, I found the problem that I was having was not just in Fredericton. It turns out that the historiography of small to mid-town policing has largely been ignored. So you have PhDs out there like Dr. Greg Marquis, who is trying to educate law enforcement agencies everywhere, but in particular small to mid-town or mid-sized municipal police forces, to take action now to preserve what they have. Nobody's saying that you have to, write a PhD on it, but if you can just take the boxes and mark them and put them aside for safekeeping until interested people would like to perhaps take some time to look into it. So this was a serious gap in the history of policing, not just in Fredericton, but in Canada as a whole. And the whole first part of the thesis, I was joking with Paul, I wish we didn't have to write a chapter on historiography, because I don't know how many people would read my thesis and say, oh, geez, but I promise you, if you stick with the thesis, you'll get to see all kinds of fun stuff through the paper. We're going to talk about some of those items here tonight. Anybody okay? Everybody okay with scandal? Scandal? You're going to hear some scandal tonight. Okay. There will be scandal, and you'll be looking at the police force in a whole different light. So, one of the things that my thesis supervisor was quite strict about, those thesis supervisors that can be that way, is that he wanted to make sure that I was able to assess, identify, and explain why policing evolved the way it did, how it started out, what themes like industrialization or penal reform or even police reform started to sort of mold and take the police force in a direction. Even its creation had to do with events that were taking place in Fredericton at that time, and of course the politicians responded as they have historically, and as I expect they always will, respond to the pressures of the public. So I put together this very rudimentary timeline. My wife looked at this and she says, really, you're going to show them that? And I said, it's yellow, it's pretty, and she said, okay. So, you've got your dates right here, and I say rudimentary because I just threw this together, but I think it's a nice visual to basically show you where some of these themes were tying towards, which I'll talk about, which is comprised of sheriffs and constables. Started in 1785 and went right up to about 1847, 1848. The sectarian violence involves the religious riot of 1847. The lack of police training, you'll see, goes across the entire timeline, because really, right up until the early 20th century, it was non-existent. And of course, you see the social classes, and I'll go into more detail about this. And if any point I bore you, please just put your hand up and say, move on, Gary, and I can go. The public nuisances, the vagrancy, the open drunks walking the streets, this was a serious issue right along the entire, and I mean the entire 19th century. Temperance and the Scott Act came in the latter part of the 19th century, but really it was a problem right from the very beginning. So people have asked the question, what was the purpose of the police? Well, the purpose of the police varies from decade to decade. And there's some decades that kind of, maybe a period of 30 or 40 years where, they were focused on preventing property crimes, whereas maybe the next decade it was stopping the thefts of property, and in others they just focused solely on matters that dealt with civic purity. All right, they wanted to make sure that people's morals were intact and that people were upstanding, and So the police were used as tools of social transformation. And if you think about that for a second, what an interesting thing to have at your disposal. If you're not behaving, this group of people will straighten you out. So you will behave and you will be an upstanding member of society. So this is largely what Fredericton is struggling with during this particular timeline. So we'll start right off in 1785, and of course 1784 was partition of New Brunswick from Nova Scotia. So New Brunswick is a brand new province here in 1785, and what you have is right at the gate, they say, well, we're a civilized society, so we're going to assign somebody to look after our public safety interests. So they provincially appoint a sheriff and a jailer in the parish of Fredericton, because the city of Fredericton doesn't get the proclamation until 1848. So in 1790, you get a provincially appointed sheriff, a jailer, and the sheriff is considered the most important legal authority of this time. He is the chief law enforcement officer. He is assisted by a jailer. They have a jail. I found some obscure information about where the first jail was, and you'll have to forgive me, I didn't spend a lot of time on researching that part of my thesis for tonight's presentation, but they had a jail, and basically their chief responsibilities were the police obligations that could, I guess, vary with different arrests, burglary, thefts, assaults, but also prisoner transport. And your first sheriff was Colonel John Murray from 1785, and he went up until close to 1790. So I was speaking about the little tidbits of information, and I don't know how else to explain this. I think probably I surprised myself more than anybody, because remember, before I went to the police academy, I wasn't interested in academia. I certainly wasn't interested in learning about the history of the police force. But by and large, I spent a number of years in the police force as a major crime detective, and I love mysteries. I loved walking into a crime scene, and I wanted to figure it out. And I didn't stop until I did figure it out, and I had good teams and partners that we would work together and we'd figure it out. So you can well imagine that when I'm in the provincial archives, and I have been searching for what seemed to be months and months and months, and I'd run across fire department stuff, and I would curse the fire department, kick the box under a shelf so nobody else would find it. There's a lot of stuff in the archives in the fire department. I'll show you where it's at. I did it. So I take this box out, and the archivists there were amazing. And if any of you in the room, you folks just an amazing. They went out of their way to help me, and I couldn't be more grateful. So I take this banker's box, and I start, the contents look old. And I'm thinking, this is a good start. So I find this very old file jacket, and I take out this almost perfectly preserved piece of paper, and it was folded, and I was very, very nervous about talking to the archive with it. So I open it up and I see what was, and I spent months looking for stuff, what was the first recorded, not necessarily the first arrest, but the first recorded arrest in the parish of Fredericton by Sheriff Xenophon Jewett. And I mean, you gotta understand, I don't get too excited about stuff. I'm not saying that. I've seen lots of stuff on police work, and there's nothing that can happen. Trust me, there's nothing that can happen that's going to surprise me. I walk into things, and people are like, "Oh my God," and I'm like, "Yeah." This buckled my knees. I was woozy, and the archivist was, "You okay?" And I said, I found, and he's like, "Yeah, I see it all the time, don't worry about it." So basically, it shows most Moses Aiken, who in early 1790 was arrested. I think it was January. He was arrested, and January and something on February the 3rd, 1790. He's arrested and picked up for burglary, and Conrad Radner is picked up in early 1790 for grand larceny. So, you know, and there's the sheriff's signature. So I'm holding, you know, something that is so precious to me that it basically forms the thesis in my mind at that point. I didn't even know where I was going with it, but I know I wanted to start. That was my starting piece to my thesis of 1795 to 1916. And I had to do 1916 because I found another piece, and I said, okay, these are my bookends. This is my beginning, and this is my end. And I'll tell you all about the end here by the end of the presentation. Give you something to look forward to. And if I'm making too big a deal and I don't hit that note at the end of it, then just take me outside and admonish me outside, no problem. So I found that, and this basically started it. So then I started asking questions. Well, how was this done? You know, who was policing? What was taking place at this time? Right? So I started reading some books, and I started talking to some other students and some professors, and lo and behold, I started finding evidence that the parish of Fredericton incorporated the British watch and ward system. Now, this was a system that was developed in 1285. Okay, so it had been centuries where they had essentially magistrate-appointed constables that would, with no salary, police a specific geographical area in their neighborhood. And I was on CBC News this morning. Thanks, Melinda. And I was speaking to Terry Sege, and I mentioned that you know, they were unpaid, and Terry was incredulous. He was like, "What? They were unpaid?" And of course, that's our modern contemporary thinking, right? We think that if you're doing a job, you should be paid. But back then, it was part of your community, you know, responsibility. So, you know, the six of us would live in a particular neighborhood, and we'd say, well, Dave, you've got to watch tonight, so the rest of us can get some sleep and we don't have to worry about our property, the horses, the cattle, and then I'll take it from there. So this is what you had. Their obligations included, and they were given powers of arrest for theft, burglary, robbery, arson. Don't forget that I'm going to come to the drunken disorder here, but that was a part of it. Collection of parish taxes. Now, this is where things start to go a bit awry. Okay, so you have unpaid members of the public, but they're out doing tax collection, they're writing warrants, issuing warrants, they're doing liquor enforcement, and they're doing some things that they need to be doing, but they're doing it all without any training and with zero accountability. So you get complaints coming in from the magistrates and from the public that, you know, stuff's going missing. And I know nobody would be shocked that, you know, for unpaid salaries that people might start talking some stuff. So as a result, you had some issues of trust with the constables, and that is well documented right up until the 1840s. So for the better part of 5 decades, this was an issue. And the watch and ward system was being used. So the drunken disorderly, I wanted to put this in, and I said it's been an issue for the entire 19th century. It's still an issue, right? It's typically going to be an issue, one of many that faces the public. So NB liquor laws in place as far back as partition of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Look at this stat here, and in my thesis, I'm very cautious. My thesis supervisor said, when you get stats, you know, just take them with a grain of salt, or at the very least, let people know that they should be taken with caution. But 612,000 gallons consumed by 74,000 New Brunswickers in 1824. Maritime go, real maritime.
That's gallons of what?
Of rum.
Right.
Yeah.
Hard liquor.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I decided to kind of step outside of New Brunswick. I looked at PEI, and PEI was right there. You know, same thing. And I'm thinking, well, different researcher, like, you know, and coming to the same conclusion. So I'm pretty comfortable and confident saying that we are good drinkers. We come from good stock, and that's why of course, people heard about the Como decision today. You know, I think that would have felt, if it went the other way, it would have fell right in line with, yeah, we would have had some. Okay, so 1929, you get the parish of Fredericton that is formalizing tavern and retail licenses. And of course, the constables are collecting those license fees as well, which is a problem. But you really start to have this brotherhood, this sisterhood of people gathering at these locations, and you really start to see it affecting home life, and you're getting complaints. You're starting to see little tidbits of it raised in some of the newspapers and some of the arrests. So by 1946, 26 taverns in Fredericton. This is important. Because you're really getting close to that 1848 and 1851 date where the Fredericton police force starts to come together. So, you know, by 1946, 26 taverns in Fredericton, there was a lot of bad things happening in the streets. The newspapers, the primary source documents are chock full of these things. There were people arrested for being drunk, the fights, the domestic violence. It really was out of control. So, the 26 taverns, and I don't know, I guess I've got this written as, okay, these are reputable. These aren't. Okay, so you've got what are termed private hells, these rum dens, and these were the unlicensed, and where people could go, what they would call the criminal class, and these were the poor members of Fredericton would have a place to go, and they would gather at these locations. So there was a social aspect to it, but also the involvement of alcohol. So you get a lot of people that start talking about liquor as destructive, and this is the early sort of rising of temperance. Would eventually we'd see the Scott Act start to come into play, and I think that was 1878 or somewhere around there. But the Sons of Temperance was actually a huge group in society by about 1847. So keep that in mind. You can get a large group of people that are starting to really have their fill of this stuff. And you're starting to get groups gathering and talking about morality and civic purity and the hell that was created. So, any questions so far?
What would be the population of Fredericton then? Well, 6,000, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
The numbers for a population of 6,000.
How did you know that? 6,000.
Well, I think I read that when Fredericton became a city, which was the building of the cathedral, it became a city at a population of 6,000, and that would be 1848.
Okay, any other questions? Am I talking too fast? Nobody's bored yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I can leave. I'll leave. So I wanted to talk about, so what did the criminal justice system look like at that point? So you still have the parish of Fredericton, we're pre-1848 when the city's proclaimed as such. So your criminal justice system comprised of the sheriff, the jailer, the constables, and the justices of the peace. I wanted to put in this tidbit. So if you had major crime convictions, they would go before the provincial courts. And this is important, the minor crime convictions, they were the court of common pleas. So the York County Jail would primarily house the minor crime, people convicted of minor crimes, which would also include debtors. So you have people who owe money. So, you know, if Sharon, it's Sharon, right? Yeah, is that your name? Sharon, okay. See the things we're accomplishing here tonight? All right, so Sharon owes $3. And the police would go pick her up and say, Sharon, $3. And Sharon says, I've got $3. And they say, well, we're going down to the Court of Common Pleas, and the judge is going to incarcerate you. So Sharon would end up at the York County Jail, and I've got a slide on it, so I don't want to talk too much about it. Imposing place, and I'll have a story for you on that later. But they were locking up debtors, a lot of them. A lot of males, but even more females. So the gender issue there I found fascinating, and I wish I had more time to explore it, but it was taking me off track of what my focus needed to be.
How would Sharon get out of debt?
What's your name, sir?
Jeff, get out of jail card.
What's your name?
My name is Wilford.
Wilson?
Wilford.
Wilfred. So that's a great question, and therein lies the problem. So you had a sheriff by the name of Miller, and his first name escapes me. And Sheriff Miller was he was a good sheriff. All accounts, he was a great sheriff. Politics started to get into play here, and members of the and I forget the name of the society, but it was a religious society. And they were issuing complaints about, how people were being treated and how long people needed to serve. So you see that early sort of introduction of penal reform. And Miller worked well with this fellow from the religious side, his name is Buston. And the two of them really started looking at how the jail could be improved when nobody else was doing it. Really, they were ahead of the curve on this. But it came down to budget dollars. They were able to get some stuff, like I know they created an exercise yard for the prisoners, and they did look at how they might get debtors instead of incarcerated, maybe start working with them to get their debts paid. Okay, thanks, Fred. Next one. So the jail was constructed in 1842. Is designed by J.E. Wolford, and if I'm not mistaken, I was reading something over here. It might be the same individual that did the design for it. Yeah. So obviously he was busy designing stuff, and he's what? He was not one of the debtors. No, he was. So they opened in 1842. Anybody ever been in the York County Jail?
Today. Yeah.
Not today. Okay.
Yesterday.
Yeah. Okay. Like it's got the science east there. So as a young constable, how many people are familiar with Alan Legier? So Alan Legier is yes, sir.
Yeah, just not to interrupt, but I see in the photograph you've got the shed. That's in that shed was the last hanging I think in Canada. Right at the end of the jail.
Yeah. Was it this hanging?
Yes, the Hamiltons. Yes.
Okay, good.
The back to back. And what's amazing with that, the trial was held in July. I forget in January, and they were hung in July 10th or something like that, on how quick that process went through.
Yeah, okay, and I didn't know, so the shed is where they did that.
Yes, that's where they...
So, I think I had a couple of years on the police force, and my zone is zone 2, I'm downtown, and I get a call to respond to the York County Jail, and there's an inmate there that has caused some issue, and they want... Of course, it was all in the papers and everything, but I'm fairly oblivious to the fact that Alan Legier may be the one who was talking about. So I get there, and there must have been, I don't know, 20 sheriffs and people in suits and people without suits just kind of staring there looking at me. I felt like I was in Roswell, New Mexico, and there was a conspiracy. So I'm standing there, and they're all looking at me, and I said, how can I help? And they said, well, we'd like you to go down and we'd like an individual charged with he broke his toilet. And I said, oh, okay, so public initiative damaged the property, and I said, who's the client? And they said it's Alan Legier, and I remember in my notebook, and I was writing Alan, and I got to the second L, and I was like, you have this guy on trial for I don't know how many murders, you want me to charge him with damaging his, they're like, yeah, very best. You know? So I went down and I said, "G'day, Mr. Legier." He said something back. Not nice. It was not a hello, Gary. It was much different. To the point where the communication was clear. He did not want to talk to me, and I felt that I had nothing else to say to him. So I charged Mr. Legier with Section 430 of the Criminal Code, public mischief, and I said to the people, these honest, funny people that said very little, I said, I've given him a promise to appear, and anyway, it turns out that they had the whole thing on video, and they wanted to show his aggressive nature, because it was quite a, that sink never sort of jammed to the toilet. So that's why they did that, right? And they couldn't go into that type of detail. So anyway.
How many years did he serve for breaking the law?
Yeah, I tell you, it was that charge that pushed it over for the jury. All right. Okay, so I talked about the debtors. Fortress-like qualities. It was really well built and definitely made to prevent people from escaping. Interesting. You did have the capital punishment, and we talked about the Hamiltons. They killed a cab driver and they were subsequently convicted in This was an